Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. We have a great one for you here today. We have a awesome one. Really excited to be back here in the studio today. We're going to do a little bit of a cheat code, but I think it's worth it, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But first, we have some great new analysis and reporting from Ryan Grim about what the Democrats need to do. And it's kind of something we've always followed throughout the show, and really why they're not just losing white voters, white working class voters, as they always like to fret about, but they're losing people of all races. And there's a lot of different reasons why. So we'll get into see if we can draw some of these conclusions from the Ryan Grim article. Also, we talked about this yesterday. It's a little bit of a cheat code, but if you listen to the Spencer Walsh Show podcast episode, or listen live if you're in the Medford or Somerville area to the show yesterday, you may have heard me talk a little bit about Kamala Harris and her start as vice president. Didn't really get as much into that as I would like to, so I'm going to go back over it in further depth today. Also, how the Democrats of all people are promoting tax cuts to the rich, and it's not just you. Amazon has been advertising more recently, and there's a reason for that. We'll tell you why. All right, let's get into it. And we start with this. Is Ryan Grim here in The Intercept. So he's talking about how last Monday, a Democratic firm hosted focus groups with women in Virginia who voted in 2017 for Democratic Governor Ralph Northam, in 2020 for Joe Biden, and for the new Virginia Governor, Glenn Youngkin. It was centered around suburban women, which is a group that pivoted significantly to the right in the past governor's election. So yeah, they're moving to the right. They're moving in a way that was so really kind of knee-jerk, especially considering how they were previously. They were the kind of backbone of this inspiring new resistance coalition, were the suburban women, and they were a big part of the reason why Joe Biden won that state by 10 points in a state that had, previously, not too long ago, been considered purple. And you can go back years, by the way. You can go back years on this show for me to say, and I honestly, I should probably go back and find a specific episode where I said this, because I bet you go 2018, 2017, there will be a recording of me kind of saying that it may not be the best idea to build your coalition of people who have a very shaky allegiance, to say the least, to the Democratic Party, and will go back to Republican because their economic interests align with it, slightly more, and the guy is more of a, more of a bearable figure. Trump is not, a bearable figure, and the, small difference in their pocketbooks when Republican and Democrat was in charge did not, kind of outweigh the, stain on America that Trump was, I think, for a lot of these people. So I think a lot of that is just them kind of switching back. And really, the chicken's kind of coming home to roost. And I think this is a huge, kind of completely undercover narrative to this story that I'm kind of just thinking about here. And a big lesson for the Virginia election that nobody was really talking about was just that people, the bill kind of always does come due eventually in politics. It's probably going to come due for Joe Biden pretty soon, after 2 years of just having the easiest ride of anybody in political history, just getting carried through an entire presidential campaign. The bill is probably going to come due for him and Kamala Harris pretty soon. We'll get to her next. But the bill will have to come due, and the bill did just come due for the Democratic Party in Virginia. And that is why. And there's some other reasons here, too. So this guy is a consultant named Danny Barefoot. He said that Anvil Strategies, which is his group, which is kind of a, it's a parody of itself than the marketing. He called roughly 30,000 people in Virginia. Most didn't answer, but several hundred of them fit a criteria that he was looking for. People who voted Democrat, Republican in the last 3 elections. Those people were called back and offered a $100 gift card if they do a lunch hour Zoom and talk about why they voted the way they did. 96 women, a fifth of whom were not white, were broken into 3 different sessions. Barefoot sat in on one of them and got permission from the funders to share quotes and results. Focus groups are put together differently than surveys. Obviously, those are kind of more about, actually getting a weighted sample. This is kind of taking a small part of an electorate and kind of delving into it a little bit more. What Barefoot found is that while the women agree with Democrats on policy, they just did not connect with them. When they asked which party had better policy proposals, the group overwhelmingly said Democrats. But when when asked which party had cultural values closer to theirs, they cited Republicans. So the biggest disconnect came on education. Barefoot found that the school closures were likely a big part of the votes for Youngkin, and the frustration that school leadership over those closures bled into the controversy pushed by Republicans around the injection of critical race theory in a public school setting, along with the question of what parents should have in schools. And one Latino woman kind of bringing up a good point. Like, all these people who, kind of making ends meet, and also during a pandemic, and also kind of raising and helping really to educate their kids during a pandemic. And I think the big mistake here is that a lot of people make is that teachers should be punished for school closures. I think that's it's kind of ridiculous. Teachers have the right to stay safe. They have the right to try and do their jobs in a safe environment. And if that environment is not that effective with the pandemic, and it puts a lot more responsibility than should be put on the parent, is not the fault of the individual teacher or the teachers union. That is just something that nobody will ever acknowledge, and nobody's ever going to tell you, because that one Latina woman does have a point. If she's out there, she's working, or someone in her family is working, and also dealing with the kids for the last 18 months in school. And now all of a sudden Terry McAuliffe's kind of telling you, well, you don't have a say in how your kid should be educated, which is obviously a big line that really hurt him in that governor's race. The reality is, the parents are going to say back to him, and they did. Well, where were you 18 months for the last 18 months? Well, I was kind of educating my kid at home. Again, I don't think they should be blamed on the teachers or the teachers unions. I think it's just kind of like a situation that just was not, properly addressed in the right way by a lot of different forces, kind of mostly starting with the government response. But teachers should have a right also to, live, and work in a coronavirus-free environment. That's, that's not something I should really have to explain too much into further detail, I don't think. But the anger these ladies felt at Democrats for the Commonwealth's COVID-19 school closure policy became further evidence of a cultural gap between the working people and Democratic elites, who broadly supported prolonged school closures while enjoying the opportunity to work remotely. Those with means decamped. Enrollment in Fairfax schools dropped 5% and fell by 3.9% and 3.4% in Arlington and Loudoun counties, respectively. Those who were left behind organized parent groups to pressure schools to reopen. Though the groups tended to be nonpartisan or bipartisan at the start, Republican donors and conservative groups poured money and manpower into them, converting them to political potent weapons. They blended anger at the closures with complaints about Democratic board members prioritizing trendy social justice issues, all of it aimed at the November elections. They keep saying a strong return to school, but there's no details, said Sandra Davis on Fox News over the summer, co-founder of one large group, Open Fairfax Public Schools Coalition. Their attention is on other things like pet projects and social justice issues, and the kids have been left to flounder, and there's no plan for the fall. You'll be surprised to know I'm a Democrat, she said. I've tried to warn them there's a bipartisan tidal wave coming their way. They don't look us in the eye. They don't write us back. If we can't recall them one by one, there's an election in November, she says. So she's very serious about this. I think this is going to probably be a potent political weapon in these areas. If you're looking at a place, I don't know, somewhere like suburban Georgia, for example, that is going to be, I think, a very similar dynamic, because you see like the same areas, the same kind of cultural dynamics, the same kind of political beliefs and makeup coming to the fore. And, that demographic was really, really happy with Democrats until, and maybe this may just be kind of an individual Virginia thing with kind of the response within these counties, because there hasn't been as much of these kind of protests in Virginia. There hasn't been, or in Georgia, there hasn't been such like a grassroots movement to this level all across the country. But when election time comes, don't put it past Republicans to kind of work something up here. While the group was angry, the group made a Democrat angry at Democrats. The face of its opposition behind her was a coterie of Republican operatives. The bulk of the group's funding came from conservative nonprofit and Republican gubernatorial candidate Pete Snyder. Its co-founder was a Republican who lost a 2019 race for school board, and the rest of its officers were Republican operatives too. A slick nonprofit named Parents Defending Education was launched in 2020 to help guide local groups. Little effort was made to conceal who was behind it. As it turned out, a longtime Koch network operative, Nicole Neely, was placed at the helm of the quote-unquote grassroots organization, the AstroTurf organization in reality. Aside from Davis, nearly every mom and dad brought on Fox News to complain about critical race theory held a day job as a senior Republican operative. So that is kind of the purest expression of the way the Republicans have kind of always driven the fight over schools and then capitalized it, and really on a lot of things, and kind of shaped that political narrative, just using their media to kind of take these Republican operatives and just kind of elevate them to the fore and say, these are concerned parents. It's all a propaganda game. It's all, kind of the don't believe everything you read or see mentality. The fear of public schools indoctrinating our children has been a GOP theme for its base voters for decades, but in the wake of Trump's rise, the party watched in horror as suburban voters recoiled from Republicans in the arms of Democrats, casting about for an issue that could win some of them back. Recall that this is a game of margins, not absolutes. The party landed on schools. Around the country, conservative media apparatus, unrivaled by Democrats, gave air to cover the schooling issue, handing local activists language to use, a story to tell, and the resources and platform to tell it. The tactic was even more potent in Northern Virginia, where many professional Republican operatives and lobbyists live. In Loudoun County this November, Democrat Terry McAuliffe outpaced Youngkin 55-44, but Biden had beaten Trump there 62-37. Youngkin's showing was only 11,000 votes fewer than Trump a year earlier, while McAuliffe had notched 50,000 fewer votes than Biden had. While Biden carried Fairfax by 42 points, McAuliffe took it by 31. So that the GOP didn't make even bigger inroads, given their heavy investment in the issue. Maybe one silver lining for Democrats, who, witnessing a dishonest AstroTurf campaign take shape and get twisted beyond all recognition by Fox News, decided, perhaps understandably, but to their later regret, to ignore the question. After McAuliffe's debate gaffe, in which he delivered the perfect soundbite to Youngkin, I don't think parents should be telling their schools what they should teach, he took weeks to respond, initially not recognizing the danger, insisting that everybody clapped when I said it. Not quite. Even when Republicans spent heavy against outmatched Democrats, they only made marginal gains in school board races, but if the issue continues to go untested, their luck may run out. National Democrats have no coordinated response yet, leaving school board members understaffed, underfunded, and borderline volunteers hung out to dry with nothing to rely on but mainstream media assertions there's actually nothing to see here, which, as we know, can really kind of cover up a huge kind of boil under the surface. In the Virginia elections, two arguments have been running parallel in Democratic circles, and they finally collided here. You're looking at the culture war with jockeying over fraught and kind of contested concepts like wokeness and cancel culture. Critical race theory is one example of this. Democrats can't seem to agree on whether it's a good thing that should be taught and defended, or a Republican fabrication that's not being taught in elementary schools at all. The other is the random debate over race and class. Are voters who flee Democrats motivated by more economic anxiety or by racial resentment or an eroding white privilege? I think that second one there would be the question that a lot of people, probably the more worthwhile question to explore. While these debates have unfolded, Democrats have seen a steady erosion in support among working class voters of all races, while gaining support among the highly educated voters. That movement would point to towards class divisions driving voter behavior, but the rearing up of critical race theory as a central plank of the Republican Party appeared to throw up the question again. Maybe it's racism after all, and that was very, very prescient for people mostly on MSNBC, I think, like Joy Reid, and I think a commentator there, Ellie Maystall, were coming out and saying, this is, white lash. This is like a white supremacist election for like KKK Youngkin or something, which is like just so reminiscent of just like the flat McAuliffe campaign that was run, typical to MSNBC being the kind of Democratic Party media outlet, and it really just failed to understand the huge kind of dynamics at play. Properly understanding how different voting blocs understand the terms of debate, however, unlocks the contradiction. The culture war is not a proxy for race, but it's a proxy for class, which is an interesting take here from Ryan Grim, which a lot of people never kind of understand. And I think that is very true, because if you look at class culture, like, there is a difference there. There really is, in a way that people live, in a way that a huge part of the Democratic base lives, which is, people in Virginia, people who are kind of newer to the Democratic base, maybe a little bit upper class. They live and maybe live kind of in these suburban areas and have long time voted Republican. They're going to see things I'm probably more similar to these kind of more working class people because it's all so much more geographical nowadays. So for the portion of the Republican base that's heavily predisposed to racial prejudice, like the Culture War and issues like critical race theory, they easily work as dog whistles calling them to the polls. But for many voters, and not just white ones, critical race theory is in a basket with other cultural microaggressions directed at working people by the elites they see as running the Democratic Party. Take, for instance, one of the women in Barefoot's focus groups. When asked if Democrats share their cultural values, she said, "They fight for the right things, and I usually vote for them, but they believe some crazy things. Sometimes I feel like if I don't know the right words, they'll think I'm a bigot." Barefoot's results rhymed with the conclusion of a memo put out by the strategist Andrew Levison, who has long made the argument that Democratic efforts at connecting the working class voters are fundamentally flawed. The memo, published out of the Virginia election but not directly responding to it, looks at how Democrats can win support among a number of anti-Trump Republicans, rather than convince the entire white working class, which is typically approximated in polls by looking for white voters without a college degree. Levison argues that Democrats should identify a distinct, persuadable sector of white working class voters and figure out how to get them kind of members of the specific group to vote Democratic. So kind of hypothesizing here that this is pretty much the key thing that Democrats have to do. So they're kind of 3/3 of working class voters, one, super pro-Trump, one kind of centrist, or kind of one kind of hard pro-Democrat, and one kind of third in the middle, and that third in the middle getting bigger and bigger as that Democratic third erodes and erodes. Because these are people, I think, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's a very important factor to just figure out who the people were in this focus group, the class status of them per se. But I think it can not be ignored. That certain factor. But I think there is something to say here in a way that, first I think Democrats, first and foremost have to actually deliver. They have to give people a reason to go out to the polls. That is number one. But, beyond that, they have to have, kind of basic interest in just making people's lives better. That just does not seem to be the focus on a material level for a lot of the Democratic Party. And, it really does seem like the woke Democrat, the woke moderate Democrat, who is so just purpose-built from distracting away from class towards identity and that kind of politics, is on the rise. Or maybe not, as this is a pitch perfect segue into our next story about Kamala Harris. This CNN article here is the one we're going to use. Worn out by what they see as entrenched dysfunction and lack of focus, key West Wing aides have largely thrown up their hands at Vice President Kamala Harris and her staff, deciding there simply isn't time to deal with them right now, especially at a moment when Joe Biden quickly faces multiplying legislative and political concerns. The exasperation runs both ways, with interviews with nearly 36 former, current Harris aides, administration officials, Democratic operatives, donors, and outside activists who spoke extensively to CNN, reveal a complex reality inside the White House. Many in the vice president's circle fume that she is not being adequately prepared or positioned and is instead being sidelined. The vice president has told several confidants she feels constrained in what she's able to do politically, and those around her remain wary of even hinting at future political ambitions, with Biden's team highly attuned to signs of disloyalty, particularly from the vice president. Few of the insiders who CNN spoke with think she's well prepared for whichever role it will be. That is, being the vice president or being the president, which is kind of hilarious. They're all working for her. It's going to be rough. It's going to be very, very rough. So, Harris is struggling with a rocky relationship with some parts of the White House, which longtime supporters feel abandoned and see no coherent public sense of what she's done or been trying to do as vice president. Being the first woman of color in national elected office is historic, but has also come with outside scrutiny and forgiveness for even small errors, as she'll often point out. It's very, very true there. She will often point that out. So apparently defenders and people who care for Harris have been getting frantic when they're annoyed. They've been passing around a recent Onion story mocking her lack of more substantive work, one with the headline, "The White House urges Kamala Harris to sit at computer all day in case emails come through." When they're depressed, they bat down the Aaron Sorkin-style rumor that Biden might try and replace her by nominating her to a Supreme Court vacancy. Oh, I mean, I would be interesting to see if her old Senate friends would get her through there. She's perceived to be in such a weak position that top Democrats in and outside of Washington begin to speculate privately asking each other why the White House has allowed her to become so hobbled in the public consciousness, at least as they see it. And of course, you got all the statements and saying, "Oh, she's so honored." It's really going to be great. I mean, I think really. I mean, this is more than just the kind of identity-based politics that we're talking about, because people can do that and also kind of be good at it. Like someone like Barack Obama, he was the inventor of it, I would say, and everyone else is kind of just a paler impersonation of him. Not to make any kind of racial connotation there, just less prevalent, less skilled, less talented. But anyway, the key dynamic there with Barack Obama is like he was good at it. He knew how, he was politically competent. What we've seen with Kamala Harris is, and we saw this before, just no organization, no kind of political campaign, no sense of like what she wants to do. She'll just kind of let narratives get completely like just dominated by just unforced error after unforced error. One of that comes from her like saying a weird answer to a question that Americans really care about, or whether that comes from some kind of weird staff move, or just some kind of stray relationship with Biden, or just her general kind of like public persona just coming off as just incredibly, I don't know, weird. That would be very interesting. That would be very, very interesting to see how that goes. And like those sources say, I don't think it would go well. That is, if she were trying to run for president. So Harris is, again, the first vice president in decades to come into office with less experience than the president, and finding her footing was always going to be hard. Presidents and vice presidents and their staffs often clash. Barack Obama's West Wing tended to be dismissive of Biden staffers. So within the Democratic establishment, there's like two warring factions, like the kind of chill Biden guys and the hyper ambitious Obama kind of Clinton guys, which is kind of funny to me. But Republicans and right wing media turned Harris into a political target the moment she was picked for the ticket. And implicit racism and sexism have been constant. Obviously, Steve ain't going to put in all these kind of qualifiers, I guess, which are real. It is a conundrum unique to her. People are expecting their historic vice president to make history every day, when in fact she's trying to carry the duties of a secondary role. And I think people, some of the expectations kind of written in this article are implying that she'd be a superstar every day. Like, I don't know what people expected. It's very, very hard to really do that as vice president. But some people, can figure out a way. She is not one of those people. Like, I just don't think she has the kind of plotting skill. She just does not have the ability, the scheming. To just like get herself out there in front of everybody. She needs herself like a Liz Smith like Pete has, which is going to be rough, because apparently Pete and Kamala are the two, according to leaked sources here, the two big figures of the Democratic Party, like the two establishment picks, which is rough, to say the least. So Harris is being judged not just by how she's doing by the traditional standards, but of course by her playbook in history by Minion Moore. She's a kind of a Democratic operative who's Harris's close friend. Harris has emerged as a quiet force in the administration, Moore said, and she focuses attention on different issues, sometimes just by her very presence in the room. Moore said Harris' approach is to constantly be asking, should we be doing more on an issue? Are we communicating with the people whose lives are impacted? Are we missing any key constituency groups? But with many sources speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss the situation more frankly, they all tell roughly the same story. Harris's staff has repeatedly failed her and left her exposed. I think that is certainly true, but I also don't think she has the kind of political talent to work past it. She's just kind of very out of touch with the moment. And it really epitomizes the kind of Democrat Ryan Grimm was talking about in the last story. Even some who have been asked for advice lament Harris's overly cautious tendencies and staff problems, which have been a feature of every office she's held, from San Francisco District Attorney to U.S. Senate. So, if the shoe fits, if you're gonna keep hiring bad staff, maybe that's a problem with you. Maybe like the first round of staff, that's you're like, bad luck, but. If it starts to add up, it starts to add up. Anyway, so Biden aimed his to model his relationship with Harris on his own vice presidency and directed aides early in his presidency to employ her in a similar fashion. So again, a fashion that he hated and his aides hated. He arranged weekly lunches just as he's held with Obama and invited Harris to join in for the morning classified intelligence briefing. Harris, meanwhile, threw herself in improving her commitment to the president and his administration, using his relationship with Obama as her guide. Even then, some White House aides questioned whether Biden's experience as vice president would easily translate to someone with far different qualifications and skills into a much different moment. After Harris became known in the first few months for often standing by Biden's side in the frame as he made big speeches, even after she'd introduced him herself, the West Wing appears to have overcorrected, so she's been with the president noticeably less, which is interesting. Not just in public. A week and a half ago, Biden's aides and multiple outside allies rattled through calls all day trying to lock down wavering lawmakers out of the House infrastructure vote. Harris spent the afternoon touring a NASA spaceflight center in suburban Maryland. We weren't going to cancel our schedule just because of the House's foolishness, a Harris aide explained. That night, Harris was part of a small group Biden invited upstairs to the White House residence for the war room, making the last hour of calls. The next morning, celebrating the bill's passage, Biden singled her out, saying a lot of that had to do with this lady right here, the vice president, but that's not exactly how things played out. So, apparently she's been getting, they're trying to make it look like, oh yeah, she's doing all the work, because Biden said she wants to be that transitory president, and this is this is who you're trying to transition to, and it's not going that well. So, just damaging quote after damaging quote in here. It goes on to say, well, she had attended some meetings Biden hosted with lawmakers. There are many more she didn't attend, to the point that it was noteworthy that she made an unscheduled drop-by on one session in the final stretch. Harris had only been in Washington 4 years and to the White House just one time before being sworn in as VP. Missing out on these main meetings deprived her of an important aspect of the presidential apprenticeship from a self-styled master of how to actually get deals through Congress. Aides to the VP point to 150 engagements with members of the House and Senate since March, accounting for every conversation she'd had with lawmakers about the subject of infrastructure. They call this the Quiet Hill diplomacy, and it includes inviting lawmakers to join her when she's visiting their home states or holding events in Washington, many of which have touted actual elements of the infrastructure bill beyond the price tag. Harris has helped to detect concerns from outside the Beltway and has attempted to give political cover to members worried about losing their seats after voting for the legislation. So that's pretty much what she's been up to. And of course the staff is going to be putting in saying, oh, the leader's not in position to lead, but it's going to be very, very interesting to watch this space, especially how Biden and the White House staff, the staff currently in the White House around Biden right now, will be treating Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg heading into 2024. That, I would say, if you're watching the Democratic Party, as I have for a few years, you're going to want to circle that. Just a little heads up from the expert. Anyway, speaking of the Democratic Party, the House is expected to vote on this week on President Biden's Build Back Better legislation. The social spending bill includes investments in clean energy, affordable childcare, and it also includes a $285 billion tax cut that would almost exclusively benefit high-income households over the next 5 years. The measure would allow households to increase their deduction from state and local taxes from $10,000 to $80,000 through 2026, and then impose a deduction cap through 2031. It's the second most expensive item in the legislation over the next 5 years, which is really, really sad. This is apparently a this is a bill that people are calling, like, if you're on the wrong side of Twitter and you call this bill, it doesn't go far enough, you'll get absolutely killed. This is oh no, this is a big bill. This is transformative. You got to be so excited. This is a Build Back Better bill that the progressives really had to completely cave for. And the second biggest spending program is the SALT tax. That is incredible. That is just so incredible. It's more costly than establishing a paid family and medical leave program, nearly twice as expensive as funding home medical services for the elderly and disabled, according to analysis by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So this is just so perfect. They only did a paid family leave and medical program for 4 weeks. They were promising 12. They were promising more before that probably. They cut that down, and they had to add in, and think about all the times you've heard how you're going to pay for it. Think about all those times. Now, think about all the times you heard how you're going to pay for it about this. None. Because that, just like everything else these people do and say, is a political prop designed to kind of obfuscate or, aid the true purpose of what they're trying to do, which is get money to the rich. Get taxes to the rich at all possible costs. All ways, all methods, it's just going to happen. Anyway, The SALT cap was created in 2017. It's due to expire in 2026, after which point there will be no limit on SALT deductions. This new SALT cap provision is revenue neutral over 10 years because it imposes a new SALT cap after the original had expired, $80,000 for 4 years and then $10,000 in 2031. Over the next 5 years, raising the SALT cap would provide the tax cut only to those who itemize their taxes and pay more than $10,000 in state and local taxes, a group overwhelmingly made up of the wealthy. A recent analysis that said from the tax policy centers that the tax cut will benefit primarily the top 10% of income earners, with almost nothing flowing to middle and lower class families. Just, love to see it. Love to see it. So these people are going to get on average $15,000 proportionally in benefits. So Americans who earn over $867,000, the top 1% receive on average far more in savings than all other taxpayers combined at around $15,000. So that is saved in federal taxes. So very, very interesting stuff. Just kind of should give you a very valuable perspective, a key look on where the Democratic Party actually is in these issues. So, guys, things are not looking good for Amazon. They have called in Terry Crews. It's not good. Scroll through enough at TikTok, and you're bound to come up. And by the way, I was listening to, the Spencer Walsh Show podcast on, wherever. I was listening, I believe, on Spotify. But, wherever you want to listen is good. And I heard an Amazon ad, too, as well, talking about, flexible hours, internships, benefits starting on the first day, paid tuition, all that kind of stuff. Touting all these great benefits in a very, kind of fun, trendy way. I was like, wait, this is interesting. Amazon, they're a big company. Everyone knows who they are, whether they're advertising. This is weird. The video app proved TikTok, and, also my podcast, as it turned out, proved to be an ideal breeding ground for the tech behemoth early on in the pandemic, with users leaning in to an entire video genre dedicated to talking about useful and fun Amazon purchases, despite the extreme conditions workers were protesting at the time. Which is people, inside their houses. Look at what I got from Amazon, as some worker speeds away to the next delivery station. Very kind of keyhole into how America was at the time, and very much still is. So yeah, users again leaning into an entire video genre dedicated to Amazon purchases. So now with the holiday season rearing its ugly head once again, Amazon had upgraded its advertising game, trading in TikTok influencers for someone significantly more famous and potentially more influential. Amid the Great Resignation and another formation of a Amazon warehouse union effort in Staten Island, Amazon wants its future seasonal employees to know that working for Amazon is a breeze. Don't believe them? Just asked newly minted Amazon spokesperson Terry Crews. Interesting. Yeah, so Terry Crews was appearing in a pitch pretty much where he's opening boxes, having fun, flexing his muscles to talk about flexible hours, really, really fun stuff. Talking to employees about the company's tuition program, even asking, what his major should be. The advertisement was first flagged by Vice reporter Edward Onguezo. They all radiate the same kind of energy. I'm Terry Crews. We're at Amazon, where people get paid a lot of money by the hour, and there are a few neat benefits that sound nice at first, but more importantly, can't you see what a joy it is to work here? Never mind the fact that warehouse workers who exposed Amazon for its lacking personal protective equipment and COVID safety protocols had their hero pay raises cut just months into the pandemic, or tried to unionize in Bessemer, Alabama earlier this year. Here are some rubber ducks, that should be better. We're a great workplace. What do you want? It's just that simple. That is definitely interesting there. That report from Discourse Blog. But Terry Crews obviously gonna have to live the real lifestyle, with the real Amazon lifestyle, which is driving to a gazillion, way too many stops a day, peeing in bottles, and getting paid a nice amount of benefits, getting paid a good wage with quote unquote good wage, with a great amount of benefits, supposedly, I guess. I'm sure there's no strings attached to these benefits at all that will totally make it easier for the company to track you and take away your rights to organize and other key rights that you may want to have later down the road as a worker. Never gonna happen. No, Amazon's a great place to work, guys. If you're any seasonal employment, I highly recommend it. Anyway, with that being said, we will be back on Thursday. Thank you very much for listening.